Hello, welcome to the new episode for the Ambitious Sloth podcast. Today I'm really proud that I have a new guest, and I find real special one because he has a great story, what he wants to tell us afterwards. My guest is Hans Rueffert, and he is a cancer survivor. And so I'm really, really proud that he actually took the time for me right now and wants to tell us the story of how he went through it, what he learned out of it, and maybe what you also can afterwards learn from it as well. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a long commute between Jasper, Georgia, and where you're sitting in the middle of not nowhere, in the middle of everywhere.
In the middle of everywhere, to middle of about 7 million people in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm. That's wild.
Yeah, so maybe to start off at first, how did you get the really quite typical German name Hans Rueffert?
Well, so my father, I always tell people I'm a half Kraut because my dad is from Germany and he was from, I guess, you're probably too young, but many people know that there was an East Germany. So he was from East Germany, and he was actually born in a part of Germany that was given to Poland after World War II. But he would always be quick to say, but I'm not Polish. And he was very, very German. And he was one of four brothers, and he decided to come to the United States, where he met my mother, who was from Georgia. So I'm half American by way of, the Southeast, and I'm half German. But, you say it's a typical German name, but I found that it's a typical German name from people who are like 90 years old. It's not a very popular name, Hans. So
I didn't mean it was quite popular right now, but it's quite typical in...
Yes,
yeah. It is a bit old-fashioned, yes. Hans
Yes,
is...
it is old-fashioned. And I've also found like it's the generic name if you're telling a joke, usually is sort of the victim in the joke. Hans walks into a bar, so that's okay.
Maybe then for starting off, what was your life before you started with your new life journey? So for that, I have this question of, imagine you were right now at a bus stop and an old lady in front of you turns around and asks you, what do you actually do to pay my pension?
Well, I think the current answer would be that I'm actually working to make sure that her time that she receives pension is a healthier time, it's a happier time. So quality of life, quality of food. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. But leading up to, so really for the 30 years of my life, I'm only 46. Yeah, I'm 46. And but I've already worked 30 years in the restaurant industry. I mean, really since I was 4 years old. So my family had a restaurant or has a restaurant in North Georgia called the Woodbridge Inn. And in a very typical European fashion, we lived above the restaurant. So we had a 12-room hotel, which is now an 18-room hotel. But growing up, we had this adjacent hotel building, but we lived above the restaurant. So we were constantly, and I say we because I had an older sister, and she and I were constantly on call. And I've been in the restaurant shucking oysters in my pajamas more times than I can count, or making salads or washing dishes. So really my entire life is surrounded with hospitality, making sure that everybody else is happy first, but also food. And food is more than just what's on the plate. If you're going to have a meal, it's also who's across the table, what music is playing. So that entire package of hospitality was my obsession, my livelihood. And so, yes, that was sort of Hans 1.0. And then came along stomach cancer, which I have to say, the sort of dark humor of a chef getting stomach cancer was not lost on me. I love irony. I love like Monty Python irony. And so, there is a dark sort of humor to the fact. And yes, of course, it was painful and difficult. And I'm not trying to make light of that. But at the same time, I'm the guy that's always trying to find that the one thing that's positive. Like if I have, a nail in my foot, I can say, well, at least it's a new nail or whatever. I'll try to find, in the darkest hours, I try to find that one positive thing. And I think that comes from hospitality training, trying to make everybody else in the room comfortable and at ease. And yeah.
And you already mentioned the part Hans 1.0 and 2.0. How was Hans 1.0?
Well, very much career minded, and in the hospitality industry, it's a little different in that in a normal job, if you looked at somebody's resume and said, "Why were you only here for 6 months and you were at this place for only 3 months?" But in this industry, that's kind of good because you want to have the experiences. I got to work with Disney, and Disney, as a hospitality, is probably the best in the industry. But I was only there for 4 months, and so I was very much, what experiences can I take? Like a lot of people, I say career driven, but that really sort of means me driven. Of course, I have my family and I love my kids, but it was always about like what accolade, what level can I get to next? It's almost like when you're playing Super Mario Brothers, you can't put it down until you get to the next level. And I feel like I was 100% in that mode where above my health, above my family, it was about my successes, and that has been totally redefined for me. But it almost sounds cliche, but I think it was that stereotypical go, 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 me. So I did have to have a little bit of an attitude readjustment. Or I had an older lady here in Appalachia, was sort of the region that I'm in. We call it Appalachia. And she said, "Well, God just slapped you in the face, didn't he?" And I'm like, that's a pretty good assumption. You have a pretty good analogy there that I was going full speed and I got slapped in the face.
And what were kind of your goals or desires when you were striving for a career future?
Well, what's interesting, so already by the age of, 34, 35, I had really, since I was 5 years old, worked and that sounds like, well, at five, what are you doing? But in a family business like that, you do whatever you have to do. So whether it's, pulling sheets off of a bed in a room that needs to be freshened, or if it's washing dishes or taking out the trash, or, refilling the sodas. So there's something to do pretty much all times. So my sister passed away in 2004, which is basically 1 year before I was diagnosed. She had breast cancer and lived with that and struggled with that for about 7 years. And so to me, it sort of became one of those paradigm shifts like, wow, life is short. I mean, every cliche you've ever heard is true. And I'm like, I've done this same part of the hospitality industry my whole life. And I had recently been asked to be a guest on a cooking show, and I loved it. And if you've ever watched like a person on a cooking show, if there's any silence on any television show, even if it's for 3 seconds, it feels like forever. When there's an awkward silence, but for whatever reason, I was in my element. I'd done a lot of public speaking in high school. I was on the debate team, and so I was very comfortable speaking to groups, and the camera was just an extension of that. So, I mean, this sounds sort of like I'm bragging, but I don't mean to do that. It's just that I was very much in this new arena, and I wasn't just talking to the four people at the table that I'm making Bananas Foster to. I'm talking to, an entire region at the same time. And there was feedback, not instant, but I mean, we would get, emails and things, or phone calls, or even letters. People that really, they learned something, they enjoyed it, they loved the little food history things that I did. And so that very quickly snowballed into this desire to do, not just be flipping burgers, which I wasn't flipping burgers, but that's so more than just creating food for a menu, I wanted to educate and this sounds a little lofty to say it like that, but I grew up watching these, and I don't know if you have them there, but the sort of public television, and they would have these cooking shows, and it wouldn't be like the Italian show, the Swedish show, the, whatever. It would be one person like Julia Childs that was like an authority in food. And so you knew if you tuned into that show, you don't know what they're going to be talking about or cooking, but you knew that that person knows what they're talking about. And so I loved the fact that my entire life I had collected this food history and wisdom and what works, what doesn't work. And I was able to sort of repackage that and put it out there in a way that I enjoyed, in a very much public broadcasting, public television style way. And so that went from being a guest on a show to then having my own cooking show. to then eventually being asked by that small television station to host their daily news program. So all of a sudden, I'm on this fast track, career into television, and at the same time, I had made a video for this cooking competition months before. It was called the Next Food Network Star, and completely forgot that I had even submitted it. And so here I am now. I'm the new host of this daily television show, and I get a phone call from Food Network saying, "We want you to be on this reality cooking show." And at first, of course, I thought it was a joke. But that happened, and that was a huge national thing. And not only was I picked, I was America's Choice, and I had like over 4 million votes to get me on this show. And who are these people? And so I was connecting somehow with that industry and that communication side, and loved it. But I wasn't thinking of it like I do now. I wasn't thinking of it as an opportunity or a platform to do something good and to. I was thinking me, 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 me. Where do I sign the contract? What, take me to New York, take me to California, and so.
And that happened all with Hans 1.0.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was right at the transition, and a very hard reboot. It wasn't like systematic updates, every other week to make improvements. It was a hard stop. Am I going to live or die? 3 times being told that I would be dead by morning. I mean, so serious hard stop,
Yeah.
and
But
then and to a degree, I'm still kind of learning Hans 2.0 what the limitations are. But I lost a lot, and I'm not trying to jump ahead, but I lost a lot of me physically. And a friend of mine said, "There's only like 60% of you left, but you always give 100% at everything you do." And I kind of like that. I mean, that because it really does sum up. There is less of me. I do have less stamina, less energy, but what I do have is very much concentrated, like almost like a soup where you sort of boil out the excess water, and what you're left with is a concentrate. And so I feel like I'm a damn skinny chef. They always say never trust a skinny chef. So I hope to be the exception to that rule. But yeah, it's a much more concentrated version of the old Hans.
and maybe still getting back to 1.0, what happened then, like basically right before you got the message. So you were all hyped up and got the huge success in your career. And so what were you striving for when you were getting all these new contracts on the daily television show? What did it feel like back then?
I mean, gosh, it's hard to say these things without really sounding
Yeah.
conceited, but it's like when you learn a skill like juggling, and everybody else is like, "Oh my God, how do you do that?" But when you're in the rhythm, it's almost like they just fall into place. And at that moment, everything was just falling into place, and it seemed like no matter how many balls I threw up in the air, I was somehow just able to keep them going. And so I don't want to say I was unbreakable, or because obviously I was, but I felt like this is it. I mean, it's almost like when you prime a pump. I mean, you might spend 2 hours trying to prime the pump, but once the water stops flowing, you almost can't stop it. And so I felt like, okay, for 30 years I have been priming this pump, and now it's gushing. And it was not an invincible feeling, but it definitely was a like, man, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Almost like you can do no wrong, because everything I was doing, even if I was unprepared for a show, sometimes that even worked to my advantage. We'd have a camera fall over, and then being able to play off of that, in a very human way, and it's just, even when we screwed up, we were screwing up in a positive way, And so it was fun. At the same time, though, so when there was a problem, I wouldn't slow down and listen to my body or listen to the people that were telling me, "Hey, there's something wrong," because it's like, no, it's whatever. Well, I'm just stressed out from that last thing I did. I'll be fine. I just need some rest. And then again, when you hit a hard stop, it was not only physically but also emotionally, because you go from doing so many things to doing, basically being told you're dying, and that's a paradigm shift and a half.
Yes. So then going, as you already mentioned, like right into it, how did you receive that message that,
Well,
yeah, it
so
could be
I
over
had
soon?
finished the cooking competition, and did really well in that. But we the show hadn't aired yet, so I was under a, what they call an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. So I couldn't say who won, how far did I get. So I was just sort of back to my normal life, and I was producing this daily news program. It wasn't live; it was live to tape, and so there was some editing where we would insert commercials or the calendar or things like that. So every day I had a very solid deadline. So I would shoot in the morning the on-camera parts, and then we would edit in all the things. So it was every day rushing to get this thing done by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I was having some sort of pains and gastrointestinal, sort of issues, but everything that I had, you could just say stress. I just came off this crazy living in New York for 3 weeks for this, competition. And so all of my symptoms were so easy to discount as, oh, I'm just stressed out, or I hadn't been home, or I was eating differently, or whatever it was. But one day I was editing the show, and I was getting sort of tunnel vision, and I was also getting very confused. And I was editing something, and I thought, I'm using my right hand to click the left mouse button. And I was even like, that doesn't make sense. And then I was like, of course it makes sense. Like I was having this just weird, overthinking everything that I was doing. And I finally just kind of pushed back from the desk, and I said to the receptionist, I'm going to drive myself to the hospital because something is not right. I mean, everything you hear about a heart attack, I was having sort of classic heart attack symptoms. The left side of my body was going numb. I was getting tunnel vision. I was having chest pains. And, looking back now, the receptionist, her name was Karen, it's like, why didn't I drive you to the hospital? She goes, I just like, okay, have fun. Like I just said, I'm going to drive myself to the hospital. But I ended up having to pull over on the side of the road because as I was driving, the tunnel vision was getting more and more pronounced. And so essentially what was happening is I had a tumor, and that tumor was bleeding. And so it was bleeding so much that when they took my blood samples, I had the blood level of a newborn infant. Like it was that, I was 6'4", 220 pounds. And I don't know what that is in kilograms. I'm sorry. But, or it's the 6'4", anyway, it was a tall dude, overweight. And my blood level was that of an infant. And the first doctor in the emergency room said, well, you just need to eat more red meat. You're anemic. And he was ready to discharge me from the hospital. But luckily, it was right at a shift change. And the next doctor, Dr. Schnars, I just ran into her recently. She was smart enough to say, you have to be bleeding internally. There's no way that you would have blood level this low if there's not blood loss somewhere, and you're obviously not, missing a limb. So you have to be bleeding internally. And so she had the wisdom to, order a scope. So they went in with a scope. And then right there at the junction between the esophagus and the stomach, which is a pretty common place for these types of cancers to occur, they call it the GI junction, was a tumor. And they estimated that tumor to be minimum 2 years old. And it was bleeding, and it was bleeding profusely. So, I don't know. So basically that means that I did that entire crazy cooking competition and all of the sort of stressful things with cancer. As a cancer survivor, I didn't know it, but I was, I was doing all of these things with +1 because I had this tumor, which, having just lost my sister 11 months prior, it doesn't make any sense why I thought this, but I sort of thought, they always say lightning never strikes twice. So I kind of thought, well, so my sister got cancer. So this doesn't make sense to say it out loud, but I somehow just thought that means that I missed the bullet, or I dodged the bullet, because, the odds are so tiny that the two siblings, especially at a young age, would get cancer. Two different primary cancers. She had breast cancer, I had gastric cancer. And so, that never crossed my mind that the symptoms I was having could be or would be, cancer.
And so when you first heard this message, what was the first thing that crossed your mind?
Well, so this would have been 2005. My son would be 5 years old. My daughter would be 2, going on 3. And that was my first thought was my family. I immediately wanted to see my family. My family overseas, my extended family, and it's going back to that hospitality connection. It wasn't about me necessarily. It was I wanted to see family. I wanted to surround myself with family as much as I possibly could. with the understanding that sort of this could be it. This is sort of the beginning of the end. And I've said this before. I think this sounds kind of almost cruel, but I almost feel like everybody should get the news that they have cancer, but not the actual disease, because it is amazing how much you can get done. You start to see every grain of sand going through your hourglass, and so again, every cliche you've ever heard is true, but you start realizing what's important, what's not important. Why are we stressing about stuff that we can't change or genuinely isn't important, when we have this very short time on this very weird ride. So it is almost like this instant focus, and so again, and I know of stories where people get a diagnosis and they change their life, they stop smoking, they change their career, and then it was a misdiagnosis. But would they have done all of these positive things if they hadn't have had that negative news? So
Yeah.
It's a tough call to make, but I feel like it was, it made a better version of me in the end, or not the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, in the current state.
So you said made a huge shift in your priorities from concentrating on your career and like getting more and more audience or just better
Sure.
on TV towards your whole family.
Sure.
Was that the major shift that happened?
Yeah,
Or what
and
else did
also
happen?
I think I was always the optimist in the family, or at least the realist. It wasn't half empty or half full in my mind. If you were in the process of filling it, it was half full, and if you're in the process of draining it, it was half empty. So, but I do think it, especially in the context of other people complaining. So, when you're in the hospital for 7 weeks and you've got tubes coming out of everywhere and you can't eat anything or drink anything, and then you hear in the lobby somebody complaining about traffic, or they're complaining about the weather, or they're, and you're thinking like, what a dumb thing to be complaining about. Like, and not that I would go up and say, hey, shut up, this is stupid to complain about, but you see yourself in that example that, God, I'm, spending this time complaining about the dumbest stuff, and none of that stuff is even remotely important. We sort of trick ourselves into thinking that there's this great importance to the things that we do, but in reality, it's just we're the flea on the flea on the flea of a it's so insignificant. Many of the things that we stress about that we A, can't change, and B, it's just not relevant or important in the great scheme of things.
Put everything in relation for you for
It is true perspective. I mean, it is refined, rare, comes in a little blue Tiffany box perspective that you just can't get any other way. I mean, even if you were to try to fake yourself out and think, I need to be more optimistic, it isn't until you have that catalyst, And I was given, and my wife remembers better than me, there are a lot of these sort of moments that I don't really remember specifically, but I know them from her experiencing, because in a lot of ways, it's a harder journey for the caregivers in some ways, because I would take the disease for my kids, but it doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? I would do anything to jump in front of that bullet for them, and she would do the same for me, but it doesn't work that way. So they're desperate to want to help, to want to contribute, to want to, make a difference, but I'm still the guy that has to sit in the radiation or, take the chemo in my veins or what have you. So it's a hard place to be in there. But I was given at some point, when we're doing research, and my wife, Amy, never wanted to give me the statistics, of, you've got an X% chance of surviving. But just kind of working with the idea, let's say I had a 10% chance of surviving this, which the number was actually far less than that. But I thought, well, if all you're thinking about is that 10%, or if all you're thinking about is the 90%, like I look at any given wall, it's 90% wall and 10% door. And if your goal is to get through the door, don't focus on the 90% wall. There's a scenario where, policemen who pull over cars on the side of the road, they put on their lights to make sure somebody doesn't hit them. Well, oftentimes they get hit because people are sort of drawn to that, the thing that they're trying to avoid, they're drawn straight to it. And so I thought, just paradigm shift. I don't want to think about the 90% wall, which is a 90% wall with knives and poison and because it, chemotherapy, radiation, all that stuff, I want to think about the 10% door because somebody had to get through that door to make it even 10%. And so I thought, well, I'm about to lose a whole bunch of weight, so I'll fit in the door a little faster, easier. So that was kind of my philosophy: is no matter what they tell me, if there's a chance that I'm going to make it through there, let's focus on the chance, not on the 90% wall.
That sounds like a really good philosophy. However, then when I would now think about having cancer, obviously the first thing what pops in mind is that, especially with gastro cancer, as you said, like so little chance to survive. It's like, oh, I will probably not make it,
Yeah,
just because of statistics. Did you also have such moments in which you were
sure.
thinking like, okay, that's not never gonna work, and how
Yeah,
did you
and
get out of this?
that's a good point. I mean, we have the expression Pollyanna. It's not that you're Pollyanna about it and sticking everything is about a filter. Everything is about what glasses that you put on, right? And so, uh, even in the worst moments, I could always find some little bit of humor, and sometimes it was dark humor. Sometimes maybe even slightly inappropriate humor. But I would always find some way to try to make everybody in the room laugh. Because quite honestly, I mean, let's think about it. All of our stories end in an obituary, right? Nobody makes it through this thing alive. So it's especially after 3 times them telling me you'd be dead by morning. The first conversation my wife and I had about that, we planned my funeral. We talked about what music we wanted to have. We shed a lot of tears. But by the third time, we had the conversations that pretty much everybody needs to have anyway. And so it wasn't really something, we wasn't not looking forward to it, but we were, kind of a little more ready for it, a little more solid in the fact that whether it's cancer, whether it's the proverbial get hit by a bus, or whether it's, accidental poisoning, whatever it is, all of us are checking out feet first, at some point. And so it really is just a matter of how do we, put that filter on or put on those glasses that we're kind of not ignoring, but we're not giving power to the things we can't change, the things we don't like, and we're trying to focus on and give power to the things that we can change. And going back to your analogy of what would I say to the lady at the bus stop, before I was sort of an entertainer to the lady at the bus stop, I'm like, well, turn on the television, you can, hear me tell some stupid food jokes and make a meal that you'll never get to try. But now I'm actually going to hospitals and interacting with people on a one-on-one level and making food. And I'm doing a video series called the Gesundheit Kitchen, which for, some people think that Gesundheit means God bless, because in the States, when people sneeze, they either say God bless you or they say Gesundheit. But Gesundheit really means health.
They actually say Gesundheit when they sneeze.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Here in the States, you will have people say Gesundheit.
Oh,
But if
wow.
you ask, yeah, isn't that wild? But if you ask them, what does it mean? They would say, oh, it means God bless in German. But obviously it doesn't. The word literally means health. And so I thought, if the one thing that I would wish to anybody, that expression, you don't know what you have until it's gone. If you don't have your health, I mean, you don't have anything. I mean, it doesn't matter how much money you have. I mean, look, Steve Jobs, one of the richest men in the world, died of pancreatic cancer. And there was no amount of money that he could throw into that and come out with a different outcome. So, it is truly a paradigm shift of, priorities and focus. So that really became my overall message when I'm able to go to these cancer wellness centers or anything. I've been lucky enough to speak at a lot of corporate events for Porsche, for Disney, for Home Depot. And the number one thing people want to ask about is nutrition, because they feel like that's the one area of their life that they can control. Now, they might not have the what was the word I'm looking for? Kind of the self-discipline to not eat the cake or the cookie. And I'm not trying to say those are bad, but I mean, in the context, if you're looking at a pie chart, you're not supposed to eat the whole pie. It's supposed to be a healthy section of these different types of food. So when I go and speak at these events, that's usually the first. They want to know what's the shortcut to nutrition or the shortcut to health, and there isn't one. I mean, even the idea of there's this reductionist theory of nutrition that you can just take a pill that has all of these nutrients extracted or extrapolated from them, and that's going to make you healthy. But the reality is, carrot has more than just beta carotene. It has 5 different carotenes, and they work best in unison with each other. So the best way to get that health benefit is just to eat the damn carrot, you know. So I'm not saying that you don't buy supplements, but I think you know, if you have a deficiency that you need to boost, well then go for the supplement. But I think the idea of eating whole foods, and not the grocery store chain Whole Foods, but you know, complete foods. There's a lot of credence and credibility to the idea that food is medicine. But you know, as I said before, it's so much more than medicine. It's so much more than fuel. It's for us as humans, it's a social thing. It's you know, it's a chance to get together and talk about the day, or listen to music, or even watch television, or whatever it is. It's a social event. And so if you're going to have to eat anyway, it really isn't that much more money or that much more effort to do it in a positive way, to do it in a way that meaningfully and directly impacts not only your health, but also your emotional well-being, your energy level, your mental focus. And, you know, it's not a suggestion or a hunch or an idea. It is the truth that, you know, how we fuel our machine. I always love kind of breaking things down to analogies. And so as I was speaking to the folks at Porsche, the North American headquarters is located in Atlanta, which is very close to where I live. And I said, you know, you wouldn't take one of these Porsches, open the gas flap, and then pour a gallon of pancake syrup into the engine and expect that engine to, number one, perform at all. But if it did perform, would you expect it to run at maximum efficiency, maximum power? And the reality is we do that to ourselves all the time. You know, if you look at sort of the American breakfast when people go out to eat, I mean, they're eating so much sugar. I mean, hummingbirds are even going, that's just too much sugar. You know, that's the, but then they might have this short burst of energy, but then the rest of the day they're tired, they're lethargic, their skin breaks out, they have no true energy.
So
And then they
maybe
wonder.
then I would like to have a specific question for that, because
Sure.
I'm just also interested in what does then the sugar you take in actually does to your body, because we see it all the time as your energy you
Sure.
get through carbohydrates, but what does sugar then to your body if it drains you the rest of the day?
Well, that's a great point. And of course, I have to sort of say the caveat that all of our machines are slightly different in that, you know, how I process sugar now is really more like a diabetic. So they removed several key organs from my system, but they left the pancreas, and the pancreas creates and releases insulin, which just helps break down those carbohydrates and sugars. But since I have no storage now, oftentimes that insulin goes straight into my bloodstream and causes like a hyper or hypoglycemia. I'll have these sugar crashes or these sugar surpluses. And so I have to always travel with these little glucose tablets to try to, I don't have to monitor my blood sugar with a device, but I know, like, if I'm starting to crash, it's because I ate too many sugars. You might have heard the term empty calories. And empty calories, essentially, yes, they might have, you know, 1,500 calories in this candy bar, but there's really nothing behind it. There's no protein, there's no nutrition, there's no amino acids, there's no, all of the things that are in food. Going back to the car analogy, all of the stuff that makes the fuel combust and, you know, move you forward is not there. It looks like gas, it smells like gas, but it's just a whole bunch of calories, almost like if you try to run the car just on nitrous oxide. You know, it's not going to work. You're going to have a burnout. So you might be able to do that in a small injection of nitrous oxide to get that little bit of a boost. And I think sugar can be thought of in that way. In fact, I'm going to remember that. Sugar is the nitrous oxide of our fuel system. What creates that long, almost like an old-fashioned steam locomotive engine. Like, you couldn't stop those things, right? Because once they got going, they were just these powerhouses. And so protein, but specifically plant-based protein, especially for a guy with no stomach. So if you really think about it, I love it when people say, well, if you don't have a stomach, how do you eat? And I'm like, well, usually with a knife and fork, sometimes with a spoon. But I know what they're asking. But the reality is, stomach is not where, that's not where digestion happens, right? So the stomach is almost like a waiting room. It's like purgatory for food. And then the stomach acid helps sort of break that down and get it ready for digestion, which happens in the intestines. So it sounds almost redundant to say that, but you'd be amazed how many people just don't understand the basics of how the body works. And that's not a negative statement on them. It's just that we aren't taught that. I mean, we're from a very early age, we're just fed spoonfuls of sugar, and sugar affects the same. And I'm sure you've heard this. It's the same rewards as
Yes.
cocaine. It hits the brain just like you're having cocaine. I'm sure it's not just like you're having cocaine. Having never tried cocaine, I don't know, but there is a great reward system for having that candy bar or that sweetened tea or whatever it is. But so for me, I've found, and again, all of our engines are different, but these plant-based protein, and of course, people immediately think of soy, and soy can be good, especially the organic soy. That's a whole separate conversation. But things like beans, things like brown rice, things like these high protein grains like quinoa. Quinoa is a very popular one right now. Amaranth, spelt, millet. There's all of these things, and some people say it sounds like bird food. It is bird food because the birds have figured out that is a great way. The birds are in fact a great example because they have their little engines are so efficient because they have to be able to fly. I mean, think about a hummingbird, for example. They're eating almost pure sugar because they're having to beat their wings however many times a second. But like if you look at like the frigate birds that fly literally across the ocean, it's the protein that builds muscle and it gives them that power. Our digestive system, and not to get again, I could talk for days on this, but if we were in a zoo and you were the zookeeper, you would dissect one of us and go, okay, this thing is obviously not a carnivore because the carnivores have big teeth, they have a large digestive system. It's also a very short digestive system, so they get what they need out of it, and the rest of it goes out. And ours is really more herbivore, or you could argue omnivore, but fruits and nuts and plants, and that's why we have the molars to chew those kind of things. But our gut is set up like any other herbivore or omnivore, is to process those fruits and nuts and grains. And so if I eat every day, I always have in my refrigerator things like brown rice. In fact, here I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is here. Hang on. All right. So not just brown rice. This is black rice.
What is that?
So this is a Thai. It's from Thailand, and it's called black rice. And this is not artificial. This is just the color. It's actually really more like purple. It has a kind of a purplish effect, but it's super high in protein. It's a little bit sticky, much like sushi rice. It's a short grain rice, so it's got but it's got a wonderful kind of nutty flavor. It's a little bit chewy. But this takes about an hour and 15 minutes to cook. So I have these things already ready in my fridge. And so for breakfast, I might just heat up some of this in a skillet with one fried egg and, a little garlic and whatever. Or for lunch, I might make a salad with this as sort of the lettuce of the salad with some tofu or some beans.
Yeah.
But I always have these kind of things ready. So when I'm inspired to eat, I don't now have to wait an hour and a half for the rice to cook or the millet to cook. So I try to have, and also this has no salt or no sugar in it. So if I decide if I want to make a rice pudding and have something sweet, I can take it in that direction because I haven't already put salt in here. So some recipes say, well, put a little salt in. I try to do these as neutral as I can because this is my blank canvas. This is the thing that when I'm ready to make a meal, I have this already ready. But even on its own, even if I put nothing else in there, that is just crazy nutrition that your body not only is easy to extract, it's also full of that insoluble fiber, which acts as a brush to kind of help push through. Here we're talking about bowel movements on your on your show. Sorry about that, but you know what I mean. There's a very physical component to food as well, and the more you can get to the natural state of the food, the better it is. And so that's just one example. I always have things like that in my refrigerator, so that when I'm ready to paint, I have those. The paints are already mixed, the canvas is already set, and then I can just create without having to wait for all of this other stuff to happen.
I think that is, or at least for me, it seems like a really, really important part that I right now also look more into. How can I use nutrition more to really live, for me, a better life in a sense that also, I think it also changed the moods in which you are, just because your body gets different nutritions and then feels better. And so I think it's a really important part that generally people should look into what they eat and maybe spend couple of days actually to figure out, okay, what works for me, what works not for me. And then also the question, did it after maybe jumping back a bit, after you had already survived your cancer, you also obviously had to change your nutrition. Did that also had a huge impact on your mental state or how you felt in general or how you could focus yourself?
Absolutely. And there's a wonderful book by a German lady named Julia Enders, and it's just called Gut. And I would recommend it to anybody. And she does a great job. And her sister actually does these wonderful little funny illustrations. But she does a great job of sort of talking about what we talked about as sort of how the body breaks down food. But she sort of lays out this theory, which is a very prominent theory now, that not only does your entire immune system live in your gut. You know, you've heard of probiotics, and so probiotics are these little bacteria, and they really, your entire immune system lives in your gut. But they've found that if you have a lifestyle where you eat a lot of fast food or eat a lot of sort of greasy things like potato chips, French fries, and you have a craving for that, like if you haven't had it in a while, it's really not you having the craving. It's the bacteria in your gut are having that craving. Now, of course, they are sending you the signal that makes you crave it. But that almost sounds science fiction-y, but it is reality that how we eat determines the population of our gut bacteria in the floor. It's kind of creepy. It's like we're this big bus and we have all these passengers in us.
Yeah.
But if you eat a lot of meats and greasy and fried, you are basically feeding that specific population of bacteria that thrives on that type of food. And so if you're eating, sort of raw foods and doing juicing and all of these things, you're feeding the good bacteria, and they will also then crave things like beets and, celery. And it is wild once you make that shift. And it's not instant. In fact, most people, once they could get inspired by this, they tend to jump into the deep end too fast. So then they think, oh, I was eating all wrong, so I'm going to scrap all that and I'm going to start eating, I'm going to start juicing 3 times a day. I'm going to eat all these raw fruits and vegetables. And what ends up happening is they really get a lot of distress because they start having diarrhea and things. And then they react, as humans often do, and go, well, I tried eating healthy and it didn't work for me. The reality is you really are kicking out all of the bad bacteria that are used to breaking down these meats and fats and greases, and you're inoculating your system with these good bacteria. And you really have to build that population, and you build that population by feeding them. So there's a new term now, prebiotics. It's not really a new term, but it's becoming very popular. If you think of probiotics are the soldiers, prebiotics are what you feed the soldiers. And so you'll see things saying now with prebiotics. Well, the reality is all whole foods have prebiotics already in them. It's not something you have to add to your diet. It is your diet. And so if you're eating nuts and fruits and vegetables that aren't overcooked. And again, not to get too scientific, but once you cook foods beyond a certain point, it's sort of that pasteurization point, you are killing off all of the good bacteria. You're killing off all of the good sort of nutritional values. And oftentimes the water that you cook the vegetables in is more nutritious than the vegetables because you've leached it out of there. So I always tell people I don't cook my vegetables. I just threaten them. So I'll hit, high heat for a second, get that little bit of char on the outside, and then stop the heat. And so the outside might be a little blistered and charred and caramelized, but the inside is basically raw. So you're getting those digestive enzymes, you're getting the good bacteria. And so that's kind of a switch. When people decide, oh, I'm going to eat this way, I always have to tell them it's baby steps. You don't learn to swim and then jump off the high dive. You have to kind of train yourself like you would any other muscle. If you on January 1st decide I'm going to start working out and you go to the gym on January 1st and you pick up the 100-pound weights on the first day, the next day you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm allergic to exercise. Everything hurts and I don't want to do this. And I tried to exercise, so you start with the smallest weights and you build up, that muscle mass. The same with the diet. If you decide I'm going to make this change in my life, don't go and buy every, healthy food and start eating only that, because you will create this, not only do you create this snapback, where your body's having to make this big adjustment, but you're also sort of you're saying goodbye to some of your favorite foods too fast. It's almost like a mental component to this too. I don't ever want to villainize food. I don't want people to go, well, that's bad. If you want the cheeseburger, have the cheeseburger, but don't have it every day. You know what I mean? So you kind of you put it into, again, that sort of holistic picture.
But then you also said, for example, before that the cravings come basically from your gut. So then I could imagine people saying, "Yeah, I crave right now for a lot of chocolate and chips." Uh, is that the same
Well,
craving then, though?
so it can be, but so what you do, just like you would with any addict, you start reducing their dose. So again, I don't want people to go, I can never have chocolate again. You just don't eat the whole chocolate bar in one setting. You have that little square of chocolate when you have that little bit of craving. But what you will find, just as any, I'm not a smoker, nor was I ever one, but people will tell you the same thing, is that after they've quit smoking, they don't crave it anymore. And they might be at a club and then they smell it and they think, oh yeah, I kind of get nostalgic. I kind of, so like when I travel to Europe, I'll have that little bit of European chocolate or that little bit of gelato, even though knowing that my system can't really handle those kind of foods anymore. But I'm in Europe, I'm in Italy, I'm going to have that, so sometimes I have to think, okay, is the GI distress worth that, it's the flavor sensation I'm about to have? And sometimes the answer is yes, and other times it's like, I'm going to pass on that. And so that's something that, comes with, I mean, so again, Hans 2.0, pretty much the entirety of my new life has been trying to tweak and learn, what can I eat? What can I not eat? How does that affect my body? And the best advice I was ever given was to keep a food diary. And I fought that idea because I love to kind of go into a market and just, see what's fresh and just grab it and do it. But it really was until they sort of forced me to write down every single thing that went past my lips, because I was finding that I was eating little pieces of candy or, a little alcohol or whatever it was, and I wasn't really mentally recording those things. And so they were having a big effect on my digestion, how I felt, but I wasn't being honest about, and the other thing is, for a normal human, if you have a horrible breakfast, too greasy, too fatty, too much, sometimes you don't feel the effect of that until the evening, because the rate of what they call it, your motility, the speed at which you digest things, sometimes that the grease and the sugar and the alcohol or whatever doesn't really hit your system until several hours later. For me, that time frame is gone, because now I don't have the luxury of a stomach. I don't have the luxury of stomach acid. And so when I swallow my meal, it's going straight into digestion station, right? I mean, it's going straight to where it's going to, almost like an injection of either nutrition or, grease or fat. And so it sounds so almost redundant to say this, but if I eat fresh, vibrant, and healthy foods, I feel fresh, vibrant, and healthy. If I eat greasy, overcooked, overprocessed foods, I feel greasy, overcooked, and overprocessed, but I feel it immediately. And so that has really given me like this laser sharp focus on, you are what you eat.
Yeah.
How I eat is going to immediately affect how I feel, but not just physically, but mentally. And so getting back to that sort of point that I went around and I'm coming back to, is that it really does affect your mental clarity, your mood. And we've all had days where if you don't feel right, if you've got to feel greasy and you had too much to drink last night and you went to some questionable, ethnic restaurant last night, and then today you have no energy and you have no focus, and, oh God, I got to do that report, but you're not inspired. And you cannot tell me that's not because of the junk that you put in your engine. I mean, that is, it's so crystal clear to me, because again, I get punished every time but I don't think of it as having to walk the straight and narrow, or having to live this monastic life where I can't eat this or can't eat that. I just can't eat that much of it. And like I said, sometimes a square of dark chocolate can be just as rewarding as eating the entire bar, because if you eat the entire bar, then you have that kind of like, oh my God, there's the guilt and the grease and so I avoid all that and just have the one square. And that's not to say that I still have moments of weakness. I mean, there's still going to be times that I do eat too much, and then I'm like, oh my God, I ate too much. It's just harder for me to eat too much because I don't have the storage.
Yeah, but then also, would you changed your nutrition quite a lot, and so some people would say that this is too much of an effort to right now change my whole nutrition in order to have maybe a bit of mental more clarity, or because they also, I mean, I myself probably can also improve a lot still. Don't see the immediate benefit of
Right.
putting so much effort in nutrition, maybe cooking
Sure.
myself, having whole foods. Like, does that really weigh in comparison to the effort and the reward?
I think the best answer for that is it's just like your savings account. And, your savings account, you don't need it on a daily basis, but when you need it, thank God it's there, right? And it's the same sort of a thing. If you're making these sort of small deposits every day into this account that you don't see, you don't take money from, and before you know it, you've got this account that has, a considerable amount of money set aside. Well, it's the same sort of thing with nutrition. Is that I don't want people to. I am obsessed about it because that's who I am. It's what I do. But that's not sort of a normal, sustainable thing for most people. This is the sandbox that I play in. But I think for the average person, if they're just taking control, when you go out to eat, unless it's a sort of health food themed restaurant, kind of all bets are off because you don't know what they used. You don't know, how long it sat there. You don't know how much sugar they used. Restaurants oftentimes will go for those things like fat. I mean, fat's where the flavor is. Sugar, salt, even MSG, which is a type of salt. Those are the flavor enhancers, and so they're going for that immediate reward that while you're sitting there, 2 bites in, you're going, "Oh my God, this is the best thing ever," because that's what's going to get you to come back and spend more money. Doesn't mean it's necessarily the best thing for your body. Again, unless you're going to a nutrition-focused restaurant. But as long as you are controlling what's going into your food, and these are very simple changes. It's eating the black or brown rice instead of the white processed rice. It's eating sorghum or chickpea flour instead of the white wheat flour. It's things like that. And again, I'm sort of generalizing because I'm not trying to make the wheat flour or the white rice necessarily bad, but in the context of eating a whole and mindful diet, really paying attention to what goes in your food. And again, if you're making your own meals, there's not a lot of junk that needs to go in it. I mean, most of the meals I do are not complicated, and I have a lot of videos and recipes at the gesundheitkitchen.com. I do a lot of cooking videos. And yes, those videos are sort of targeted for gastric cancer patients, but the reality is they are for everybody because the stuff that I do is, yes, it's for somebody without a stomach, but if it works for me, it's going to work great for you. You know what I mean? You've actually got more tools in your toolbox to deal with these foods. And if I'm able to, with no stomach, get complete nutrition and it's delicious, imagine what you can do with a full set of tools, But I find that once you get beyond, say, 5, 6, 7 ingredients, your mind has a hard time even identifying those things. So there's that KISS rule, keep it simple and stupid, KISS. So on most of the food I do, people are always like, well, you're a chef and that looks so easy. It is easy. I mean, and my dad had this great expression, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. Meaning you can't take bad ingredients and put them together in any order and expect to have great food. And it's the same with great ingredients. If you have things like, fresh sugar snap peas and Meyer lemons and whatever it is, you have all of these great ingredients which taste great on their own. There's hardly a combination that you can put together and they would taste bad together. You know what I mean? Every color in the crayon box is beautiful. So the only time that they become muddy is if you then put them all together too much too fast. So I use the crayon analogy quite often because, if you think about it, all the colors together are going to make like mud. So there are some really ugly colors in the crayon box too. And I feel like people, in my mind, those are the things like bitter, sour, salty, and on their own, they can be sort of negative flavors. But if you're using them in the right context, the right proportion, and I always tell people, like, if there's this sort of zombie gray color that's in the big box, 256 crayons, and if you made the whole picture with that zombie gray color, it's going to be an ugly picture. But if you're doing a sunset, a little bit of that color in the right place is what makes it realistic or surreal or spectacular. And so I feel like that the thing about cooking is you never stop learning. And so, you get a new ingredient and you tend to want to overuse it because you're excited about it, but it's really all about the balance of flavor. And so even if you're an amateur, you always have something you can learn. And so that's what I always tell people. I had a question at one of my classes the other day saying, I spend so much time in the kitchen. How do I spend less time in the kitchen? And I said, for me, it's how do I spend more time in the kitchen? I said, so that really just becomes a paradigm shift because, again, for 7 weeks, I was in the hospital with drainage tubes and couldn't eat. And I couldn't stop thinking about food. So I would even walk with my family to the hospital cafeteria with 2 IV poles. And I would be walking through the halls of the hospital just to go and smell this hospital food is not the best food in the world. So when somebody asks me, how do I spend less time in the kitchen? For me, it really becomes, how do I spend more time in the kitchen in a meaningful way? And so I put on music that I like, or I put on a podcast, or I put on, something entertaining for me, and that's my time in the kitchen. And so, is chopping mushrooms or onions a chore? It can be, but at the same time, for me, it's part of that experience. And that sounds so sort of goofy, like, oh, he's trying to be all holistic, and but really, it is a decision. And my dad always sort of, and I always talk about my dad a lot because he was a huge influence on me, but he always said happiness is not a person, place, or thing. It's a decision. And we were in Munich one time, and there's the beautiful square in Munich, and we were in this cafe. It was snowing outside, kind of miserable, wet snow. And there was a guy out there, and he was with a big vacuum truck. He was sucking out the contents of the public toilet. And so my dad's like, that guy has the shittiest job in Munich. It's snowing, it's wet, it's cold, and he was having a great time. He had on this big yellow Sony Walkman headphones. This is probably 1982. And he was just dancing, and I don't know what he was listening to, but he was having the best time. And then my dad said, but this guy, he's cold, he's miserable, and he's literally covered in flecks of human excrement, but he's happy, he's having a great time. And so that stuck with me to this day, that
Wow.
if you think of cooking as a chore, well, you don't have that guy's job. But even if you did have that guy's job, that guy's having a great time doing it. So um, that sounds, again, on paper, that's easy to do. But I always tell people that the whole idea of finding the silver linings, just like the metal silver, it's not, you don't just walk around and pick it up. And the same with silver linings, you just don't stumble over them. Sometimes you have to dig, and you have to dig hard, and you have to pick up this heavy thing and move it out of the way in order to find some kind of an optimism. But it's worth doing it. It's worth the effort. And you were asking about kind of going back to you saying, well, is it worth it to do these changes in nutrition? Because there's not an immediate, and we are all about, immediate gratification. We
Of
want to see the
course, yeah.
results now. We want to see a chart that shows that by eating this piece of broccoli today, tomorrow I gain X amount of, whatever. It doesn't work that way. It's a slow and steady, like I said, like a savings account. And I have a savings account set up where it automatically pulls, just a few dollars a week. It pulls it out, and it's money you don't miss. But then at the end of the year, like, oh my God, I saved an extra, $1,000 by doing nothing. And I think if you think of nutrition as being a negative word, oh, I got to eat healthy. Oh, I don't know how that came about, because you really are taking the best thing for you, preparing it in a way that's delicious, nutritious, and in my mind, fun. And you get to do that every day, 3 times a day, or in the example of that black rice, that's not my meal, but that is the foundation for 3 great meals, So it's just a little different way of framing that.
And how did you, or how were you able to get this mindset up, and how to get the shift in this direction?
Oh, well, I lost you for just a second, but I think I got your question. So I mentioned that my sister had cancer before me, and it was right after she got married, wasn't able to have children, and she was very bitter and very negative. And to be fair, she had every reason to be. I mean, so if you were handed out cards giving you permission to be bitter and negative, she had every reason to be bitter and negative. Multiple metastasis in her body. It just was a horrible experience, start to finish. And so, even before my diagnosis, I had said to my wife, I said, if I ever get cancer, I know how not to do cancer, because, and I feel bad saying something sort of negative about my sister posthumously, but um, she didn't have an example of somebody who survived it. She didn't have an example of somebody, even, and I've met people who are in hospice. They know that they are on the last leg of their journey, but they're not talking about death. They're talking about, that one time they went to Orlando, or that meal that they had. They're having a positive experience even in the tail end of their overall experience. So I feel like when you really look at the options, like, what if life and its moods are a buffet, why would you keep going for bitter, sour, bitter, sour, bitter, sour? Yes, you have to have some bitter and sour to appreciate the sweet and whatever, but I get that. So I'm not vying or advocating for Pollyanna, but I am saying, if you have the option of when you're sitting in traffic being mad and angry and bitter about it, or reaching over to your I almost said iPod, it's dating me, but reaching over to your at least I didn't say MP3 player,
Yeah.
but But I put on a podcast, or I put on something entertaining or educational, something that's going to make me laugh, or it's going to make me smarter, or it's going to inspire me. So, I was in the doctor's office recently, and they were short staffed. They had a bit of an in-office emergency, and so I was there almost 4 hours. And everybody's complaining, and I wasn't happy about being there for 4 hours, but I had my phone with me, and I could listen to a podcast, or I could read an inspiring article. So it is again making the decision to try to make the best out of the situation. Doesn't always work. There are days that I get mad and I get frustrated, and I have a short fuse. I'm not pretending that I have like the secret. But if you're given the option between being a pissant all day, being a fire ant all day, or being, a little more aware of yourself, aware of your surroundings, and I also find that when I do things like those classes, those are moments where I'm not thinking about myself. I'm not thinking about my nerve damage or so I'm in that moment. And so when I'm standing in front of a group of people, and whether I'm talking about optimism or I'm talking about nutrition, or I'm telling my cancer journey, it's a moment where I get to kind of turn off my internal sensors and be aware of everybody else. And that's a wonderful thing to do. And I think for anybody, whether you're sick or not sick, being able to sort of turn off your own needs for a moment and focus on somebody else's needs it's a hell of an experience.
What I found now really interesting is most of the people, when I think about it, get the idea, okay, if something bad happens outside of my environment, I get stuck in the traffic, I need to somehow internally suddenly be happy and out of nothing, basically just positive thinking makes the way. But what you just said, you can also just use any external stimuli to draw your attention on something else, which is super easy in contrast to trying to make something internally suddenly happen. So that's really interesting.
So I'm a chronic pain patient. So I have a lot of nerve damage. They've been in my chest cavity so many times. They've done a lot of damage going in and out. And so again, the best thing for me is when I do these classes or I stand up and do adrenaline is really the best pain medication. So when I'm in that moment and I'm focusing on somebody else, I don't think about the fact that I'm damaged and I'm hurt. Now, on the days where it's raining and it's cold and there are days that I just feel like, okay, I'm broken. I feel like a aluminum can that somebody just crushed and threw in the corner. But, they even recommend video games. In fact, some places sort of prescribe video game time because that's a distraction. That's a way for you to change your external stimuli, and you're focusing on what's happening to that character. Of course, some of those are maybe a little extreme, but the point being that playing a board game, playing a musical instrument, doing something that distracts you from that moment of, oh my God, I hurt.
That's really cool. And I think it's super easy also then to actually do it in contrast again to the internal part.
Sure.
So I think we went over a lot of topics today already, and I just try maybe to sum a couple of them up. So,
Sure.
So we talked about a lot about the food, then obviously your expertise and how it can make your mood, but also your body a lot better in long run. For example, as you mentioned the bank account or savings account, and also how you went through those parts in your story with the cancer. A lot helped you with focusing on your family, and then if those bad situations come up, then you can still focus on external parts, and which help you a lot on mitigating the real bad things which happened. And obviously easy to distract you from those things. And those which I wrote down because they're also for myself super interesting. But then I have one question which I think helps a lot of guests usually is, what is a question that you usually don't get asked but you wish other people would ask you that?
Well, and of course, there's so many different ways you can run with this, but
Yeah, of course, your decision.
what I feel like is not so much about the question; it's about an action. Because I will say, it doesn't matter what what the situation is. Somebody's house just burned down, or somebody just lost a loved one, or whatever the situation is. Somebody's having a negative situation. When somebody says, "Just tell me what you need, I'll do anything," that really is a blank check with nothing behind it. Because I'm the kind of person that if somebody said, "What do you need?" I'm not going to say, "I'm too weak to mow my lawn. Would you please mow my lawn?" Or "Would you please come and feed my cats?" Or "Would you please feed my children or take them to soccer practice?" Or whatever. Because that's not how I'm wired. I would never ask somebody to interrupt their day, stop what they're doing, to come do something that benefits just me. But the people who just did it, I mean, not to borrow from Nike, but the people who just made a meal and delivered it, or that just showed up with a lawnmower and cut my obviously long grass, or they, fixed a piece of the gutter that was falling down. They know that I'm too weak to climb a ladder, or so that type of person is the person that I find myself in long-term relationships with now. You sort of have your childhood friends and you have your adult friends. And if you're lucky, those two overlap. But you find as you get older and you make new friendships and new connections, I just don't want to waste my time. And that sounds selfish, but I don't want to invest a lot of energy into somebody who's not willing on investing energy, A, in themselves, and B, in other people. Because the type of people that would just do something, there's obvious, trash on the floor, pick it up. Don't wait for the cleaning crew. Or if somebody's hungry, feed them. Some of the things sound so redundant. But that's the advice that my wife and I've talked about writing an etiquette book for people that are ill, because, people always do that. "Oh, just let me know what you need. I'll do anything." Sounds nice. Or "I'll be praying for you." It's nice, but praying for me is not going to get my grass cut. I keep going back to that example because that was a very real example. Okay. We live in a neighborhood, and if you don't cut your grass, everybody's looking down on you. And I was too sick to do that. And so the neighbor that just showed up every other week with his lawnmower just did it. I mean, that was amazing. And so I think you can have that kind of an impact every day to just think, okay, what can I do for somebody else today? And it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be hugely time involving. But even if it's opening the door for somebody who's obviously got their hands full, or little things like that, you could say every action is ultimately selfish because it does make you feel incredibly good. But that little bit of positive that you impart onto somebody else is like the butterfly effect. You don't know how you've just completely changed that person's day by showing them a little bit of kindness. So if you were to put that in a question form, is what can I do on a daily basis to make people happier? Because again, coming from this industry where our job is to make other people happy, we work on holidays, we work, nights and weekends, because our job in the hospitality industry is to make sure that everybody else's needs are taken care of first. But I think there's something very hugely humanly rewarding in that act, whether it's your profession or not.
Yeah. That's I feel a really, really good question. Then maybe from your whole experience of going through the cancer process, before, after, what are maybe just like 3 life lessons you got out of this, what you would like other people to know?
Well, the first one that pops to mind is slow down. We are in such a hurry to do everything. And so you always hear people want to go to Disney World, like when I won the lottery, I'm going to Disney World. We won the championship, we're going to Disney World. I got cancer, I'm going to Disney World. But the reality is, Disney World, and as I said, I worked for Disney at a time. They're incredibly good at the finer details. Everything. There's no chipped paint. There's flowers are painted just right. There's little hidden Mickey Mouse silhouettes here and there. But most people are just running through that experience because they've spent $400 on tickets and we're only here for 5 days. We got to get everything packed in. Well, when I was sick and we did Disney World, this is just one example, but we had to do everything at a much slower pace. And so not only did we actually enjoy it more, and we didn't have the stress of having to run around and try to squeeze in life into a predetermined time frame, but we started noticing details that there's no way we would have noticed running at a breakneck speed to try to get that value out of it. So even your local park, I was visiting family in Braunschweig, Germany, and I spent the day at their little free botanical gardens, and I loved it. It was just, I spent probably 4 hours, and My host family said we hadn't been there in years, and when we did go, we were there like 15 minutes, and we were done. I'm like, oh my God, slow down. So that would be it. Slow down when you're eating, when you're watching a movie, when you're reading a book, when you're interacting. And I'm saying this to myself as much as I'm saying it to you, because I have to remind myself, slow down. Um, Kind of in that, because I've in that, sort of mindfulness, being aware, and so that overlaps a bit. But I think it's safe to say just being in the moment. And it sounds so cliche. And again, I'm saying this to myself right now as much as I am. I mean, think about a conversation you have. Sometimes you ask a question, and of course, in this situation, you are the question asker. But sometimes we're already in our mouth, we're loading up the words we want to say next rather than listening to what the person's answering. So you're interacting with another human that you could learn from, you could, engage with, that you could have a meaningful experience. But instead, you're already kind of loading up what I'm going to, as soon as he's done talking, whatever it is he's saying, I'm going to talk about this time that I did this or that. My dad used to drive him crazy. People would ask him, where are you from in Germany? And he said, I could say I'm from Disney World, Germany. They aren't listening to my answer. They're just asking because they want to talk about the one time they were in Germany, or my dad was stationed in Mannheim, or whatever it is. So being mindful and in the moment, and it's the same with food. You know, I I've had times where my 4-year-old said, "Did we eat lunch yet?" I'm like, "Yes, we ate. I made you that wonderful lunch," but she's just eating it and then going on to the next thing, and rather than actually being in that moment and enjoying the moment for what it is. So again, that might be a part A, part B kind of a thing, but being mindful. And then lastly, the name of my cookbook was Eat Like There's No Tomorrow, and
I
we
like
sold
that
out of the
title.
cookbook for now. Well, thank you, but some people see it as sort of morbid thing, but I didn't see it morbid at all. I started asking myself, if this were my last meal, would I be proud of it? And and I don't mean in an expensive way. I don't mean like in a lavish, rare way. I just mean like, so just to give you the example, before I went in for my first big surgery, they said there is a possibility that you come out of the surgery not being able to eat solid food again. Didn't happen, and but they have to always list, the possible complications.
Sure.
And so the doctor actually said to me, "So you need to go out tonight and eat like there's no tomorrow, and hit up the buffets and whatever, and get in as much." He and I were thinking about quantity, not about quality. So we went to this Mexican restaurant, which is kind of famous in the Houston, Texas area, and I ate probably 2.5 pounds of these steak fajitas, and they were delicious. But I ate so much that I was genuinely miserable afterwards. And I had to unbuckle my belt, and I just was sweating. I ate so much food. And so as I was getting prepped for surgery, I started thinking, if that was my last meal, how embarrassing that I just basically, as fast as I could, getting as much quantity into me. And I felt heavy and bloated and greasy. And I would have been happier just having two of those tacos or even one of those tacos with a little fresh salad. Or, so I started thinking, what would be my ideal last meal? And I thought, some crusty French bread, a handful of ripe figs from my fig tree, some manchego cheese or a slice of brie, or very simple, honest foods would be my ideal last meal. So I started thinking, well, every day, why don't I do that? Now, of course, we miss the mark, and of course, there are days you're traveling and you have to go through the drive-through. So don't feel guilty about it. But if you're making food for yourself, just ask yourself, okay, if this was my last meal, not in a morbid way, not in a oh my God, we're going to die way, but in a celebratory way, would this be something I could include that I'm proud for this to be the last bites I put in? And
Mm.
you'll find that like there's no tomorrow, you can input whatever it is, whatever time you do, your travels, your relationships, all of those things. Just focus on the quality, not the quantity.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it's a huge paradigm that you'll find that it's your so. But having said that, if you're focusing on quality but not slowing down and being mindful, so all of those things do
Of course. Yeah.
overlap
Yeah.
together.
Oh,
So there you go. There's the Hans top three.
pretty good. Pretty good. Um, then moving on to one of the last questions about the ambitious sloth. You already mentioned before you had a great idea, so now I want to hear what you can see yourself either being ambitious sloth, or like how does it relate to you?
Well, so number one, I love sloths, and I just think they're an amazing creature, and so I was drawn to your podcast just from the title. But I was getting my car serviced. I drive an older Mercedes SUV, which seems to always like to spend some time in the shop. Um, but here's one of those moments where I'm sitting in the car repair thing, and they have Netflix, and so I'm watching nature documentaries on Netflix while I'm getting my car repaired, and it's the BBC Earth or Blue Planet or whatever, one of those great documentary series. And it was about a type of sloth, and it lives on an island. I feel like it was in off of Brazil. Um, don't quote me on that, but anyway, there was a very small population, like less than 300 of them left, and this is an island, but it also has a lot of inland sort of swamps and streams, and so the sloths there can swim. And I never thought about sloths swimming. And apparently their fur is so dense and buoyant that I mean, they can't even drown. I mean, you can't even, so they just float back up. But so you always think of sloths as just being sort of uninspired, just sort of, moving through. In fact, the word sloth is sort of a negative term sometimes. I used to be sloth. So, but they were showing a female sloth somewhere on the island was calling it the mating call. And this little male sloth just all of a sudden went from just, feed himself and to just focused, so he heard that call. And so I'm watching this documentary, and this little sloth is as fast as you can imagine a sloth going, and he's going straight for it. But the sort of twist in this story is that it's a big island, and there's so few of them. So he sees a sloth in a tree, and he swims up to the tree, and he climbs up, and he gets there, and you can tell he's excited as much as a sloth's face can be excited. And it was a male sloth. It wasn't the female that was calling. But rather than sitting there and just going, damn, I just wasted all that time, I just swam all the way over here, whatever, without even skipping a beat, he just climbs back down the tree and starts swimming again. And I just thought, man, there's a lesson right there that this sloth, who's so motivated, I got to find this mate while she's ready to mate. I know this is a family show, so we'll just leave the details there. But he wasn't discouraged. He wasn't like going, oh, poor little me, or he wasn't pissed off. He didn't complain about traffic. He just thought, oop, wrong tree, and he just backed down the tree, and he just went to the next one. I just thought however you want to distill that down into a life lesson, that sloth kind of taught me about not wasting time thinking about I climbed the wrong tree. Get down on the ground, get to the right tree, swim to the right tree, and start climbing that one. So there's my ambitious sloth story.
That is a great ending. Really, really nice story for the ending. Now, if people listen to that and found something really valuable in there and want to contact you, where can they do this?
Well, it's funny. I always tell people if they forget my name, it's funny with a name like Hans in the States, it's almost like Cher or Madonna. Like I can say my last name, people don't remember that; they just remember Hans. But if you're thinking, okay, he was talking to some chef and he didn't have a stomach, just Google that, chef with no stomach. And so there's a lot of connections there. To my knowledge, I'm one of the only chefs with no stomach. And so I've been on the doctors, I've been on CNN, I've been on America Online did a piece on me. So I've been on a lot of these things. And what I like about that, it's not that I'm a media whore and feel like I have to be on these things, but when I get the feedback from people who go, you know what, I was depressed. I had a lady that actually called me that said she was suicidal, and her brother said that she had actually bought the equipment to do carbon monoxide poisoning. She was going to basically go to sleep in her car. She bought the vacuum hose to route the CO2 or CO back into her car, and she went inside to get like one last thing. And she turned on the television, and she was a gastric cancer patient, and she was depressed because she hadn't quite figured out what she could eat, and she was always just feeling miserable. And so she just decided, I'm better off dead than alive. And then she turns on the television, which she said she never does in the daytime. And here's this skinny guy who's laughing and making jokes about, no, I eat with a knife and a fork. In fact, they said, so do you eat like a bird? I'm like, no, I don't peck my food. I actually, I use a knife and a fork. But anyways, she said, you've been through much, much worse than me. And here you are laughing and making the best of it. And here I am getting ready to kill myself. So she immediately went and threw all those things in the dumpster. And so she reached out to me and said, just by sharing your story, you saved my life. And I still get kind of chill bumps thinking about that, because you never know what kind of an impact that you have. And even the podcast that you're doing, you are distilling this great information from multiple sources to people who are listening or watching. They're able to take away something from somebody else's mistakes or unfortunate experiences or from their successes. So I think people should always seek those things out. But again, the name is Hans. Remember that I cook. My website is just hanscooks.com.
That's pretty easy.
So, yep, Hans Cooks. But also the Gesundheit Kitchen is the name of the show that I do on YouTube. It's actually under the Gastric Cancer Foundation's sort of subheader. But you can find that directly from gesundheitkitchen.com, hanscooks.com will all get you there. If you have gastric cancer or you know someone that has gastric cancer, it can be kind of a scary Wild West out there. Just remember gastriccancer.org. That's for the Gastric Cancer Foundation, which I'm a board member on, and we have links to those videos on gastriccancer.org as well. And you know, it's a much more prominent disease than a lot of people realize. It's actually the third highest killer in cancers. It's number 3 as far as worldwide killers. Gastric cancer is up there, yet receives probably proportionally the smallest amount of funding. So it's a lot of times you know somebody who passed away from gastric cancer, but you've heard it either called stomach cancer or you just knew that they had cancer. So anyway, there's a lot of information to be learned at gastriccancer.org. And I also do a lot of public appearances, and I do a lot of things for, as I mentioned, corporations, especially corporations who understand that the health of their employees directly impacts the health of their company, the health of their bottom line.
Yes.
So anytime if there's a corporation, like I said, I recently did one with Porsche, and I love that because I learned something from them, they learned something from me, and it's a normal day at work, but they are able to talk about things in a very positive, inspiring way. So I love doing those sort of corporate outreach things because it gives me a chance to kind of disrupt the normal everyday workflow of a company and get people excited about getting in the kitchen again. So hanscooks.com, gesundheitkitchen.com, or Google the Chef with No Stomach and you'll find me there. Or you can go on to the Ambitious Sloths podcast and find me there as well.
Perfect answer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking your whole morning for having this podcast with me. And,
my pleasure.
I don't want to keep you too long from getting your tree.
Yep, Christmas tree time. I don't want to date the podcast, but yeah, it is time for a Christmas tree around here.
All right, have a really great day. Enjoy your meals.
Thank you.
And
I always do. That's a given. I always do.
And yeah, it was a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Speaking of which, what are we eating right behind you? There's some sort of that looks like a Hong Kong delicacy or something. What are we eating there? Are those rice crackers or right behind your head there, that red bag?
These are you mean up there, the top?
Yeah.
Yeah, these are like shrimp crackers.
I love them. Yeah, I love them. When I eat them, my wife's always like, "What is that smell?" I'm like, "Oh, that's my snack. I love shrimp crackers." So, So I'm looking at your pantries a little bare though. So you need to invite me over. We'll work on trying to fix things. I like how you have sort of the stereotypical China cap in the back there.
Yes.
Yep, that's great.
And underneath there are a couple of those instant noodles as well.
Ramen. Yeah,
yes.
You got to have the instant ramen.
Yes.
I noticed that right off the bat. But you can do a lot of good things with that. So I'm serious. You need to get me in Hong Kong. Get me over there. Have a hospital, sponsor it. I'll come and do a healthy cooking demonstration, and then we'll come back to your apartment and rethink that. We'll rethink that pantry a little bit.
I'd love to see that. Yes. Awesome.
Sounds good. We'll tape it for the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Sounds good, Julian. Take care.
That's it.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.